Alright boys, it's 420 Dragon, and today we're going to be taking a look at the results from this past weekend's Pauper Challenges. So, first thing we note when we look at the Saturday's Pauper Challenge is that we got against winning with this interesting mono black splashing green out of the sideboard for a little bit of Weather Storm. This is kind of a sweet deck list. I think it fixes a lot of the problems that I've had when I play mono black, which is that there's not much life gain. It's got a couple of Vampire Sovereigns in the main deck, which not only provide you with the life gain, but they actually also provide a decent source of pressure as well. It's not playing Sign in Blood or Night's Whisper effects, but instead going for Deadly Dispute, Reckoner's Bargain with Wellsprings, and a little bit of Chromatic Star, Nile Spellbound, Blood Fountain action. To actually have your card draw spells not deal 2 damage to you, and sometimes even gain you life. And then the removal suite is pretty interesting. It's got 1 Disfigure, 2 Cast Down, 3 Chainers, 3 Snuff Out, 2 Fumies. Okay, so that's kind of an interesting split. He's not going with the full 4 Snuff Outs. He is going with some Fumes main deck. And then, obviously, you're going to want a lot of Chainers, but I guess he doesn't want the full 4 Chainers. And he does want a couple Cast Downs to just have that nice, efficient spot removal to clear out a particular threat when there might be multiple, and Chainers might be less useful. A couple of Duresses as well. This is kind of interesting. So I'm not sure how this works out in the meta right now. I think Duress usually, in my opinion, has been a kind of bad card in Pauper. But it seems to have worked pretty well for against here. So, you know, I definitely don't have as much experience with this deck as him. And he's got a couple Dusk Legion Zealots in the main deck. I guess these can provide a blocking body or an attacking body, can threaten Monarchy or Initiative. 3 Thorns and 3 Anglers, not maxing out on many cards here. I think it's kind of interesting just the number splits that he's used throughout the deck. There's a lot of 3-ofs, which kind of signals to me that he's done a lot of work on this deck, and that he's played it quite a bit, it seems, to refine it to these numbers with 3 Snuff Out, 3 Angler, 3 Thorn, 3 Chainers. Like, I know my version of this deck that I played last week on stream was a lot more crude and had 4 copies of just a lot of the cards I wanted to play. And then in terms of the sideboard, he is having 4 Diabolic Edicts. He's not wanting to mess around with Guardians or Bogles players or indestructible thingies. He's having the rest of the Duresses, another 3rd Nile Spellbomb, 3 Weather the Storms. This is basically the only green card in the 75. Colony Garden is pretty useful, so it's not like he's spending too much on the splash. As Colony Garden can provide tokens for Deadly Dispute or Reckoners. But Weather the Storm does seem pretty useful in the mono black strategy, because it is a strategy that cares about its life total a bit more than other decks, because it is trying to use Snuff Out, and it is trying to go into the late game, so it can struggle against burn strategies where you're not actually having any counter spells in your deck. So it's not like you're playing a blue deck where you can just like put out a little bit of pressure and then just stock up, get up to like 3-4 counter spells in hand, and your opponent's top decking, and you can just never let them get the last point of burn on you. This deck actually has to care about its life total in matchups like that, or even versus like Affinity or Red-White, where, you know, all of a sudden these 4 Galvanic Blasts in their deck can represent just, you know, 4/5 of your life total. So I do kind of like the Weather the Storm as just a way to, you know, counteract those types of strategies, which I think can be pretty effective against black decks. The Stinkweed Imp is kind of interesting. I guess I'm not really sure what this is supposed to do. So I'm imagining it's probably okay versus like fairies or something, or I don't know. This one's a little confusing to me. I'm not really sure what this is supposed to be doing. He's not maxing out on Fumes either. I guess it has like Dredge 5. Oh, maybe you know what? It's actually probably kind of good against Tolarian Terror. You just play this thing, dredge it a couple times, and block. It's probably kind of hard to deal with, actually. It doesn't get snuff outed. I mean, well, I guess it's post sideboard, so they're not going to have Snuff Out in their deck versus mono black post sideboard. But, I mean, it can be a recursive sort of answer to Tildarian Terror or Gurmag. He's got the 4th Snuff Out, the 4th Thorn, and a Spinning Darkness. I think this card is awesome. I think this card is underplayed for no real reason. I think this card is pretty good. So I do like the inclusion of Spinning Darkness. And yeah, congrats to him. It looks like in the other Pauper Challenge here, he actually got 9th as well. So this deck could be pretty real. Maybe we'll have to try it out on stream. So yeah. And second place, we got Ty Ruby with the Cycle Storm deck. He's basically, in my opinion, he's just the strongest Cycle Storm player. He plays it a lot. Whenever I'm playing familiars, he's the last person I want to face because he is really a menace with this deck. It looks pretty standard. I think it's nothing we haven't seen before out of the Cycle Storm decks. He's got the 12 lands, Blood Celebrant. It's pretty refined. I think he spent a lot of time working on this deck. Yeah, and I guess for those of you who don't know, the idea with this strategy is you play a bunch of creatures that cycle. You cycle them, looking to find the Songs of the Damned and Reap in the Graves. You cast the Songs of the Damned, make a shit ton of mana, play the Reaping, get back all the creatures you've cycled. You play like some rituals beforehand to juice up the Reaping with the Storm count. And then you get back all the creatures. You cycle, cycle, cycle. You find another Songs of the Damned. Another Reaping, you do it again, and then Repository Scab can just let you get a little bit loopy, where you play the Repository, get back the Songs of the Damned, Reaping back everything, play the Repository, maybe you're missing a Reaping this time, so you Repository back the Reaping, and you play the songs that you found off all your cycles, and then eventually you get into a spot where you can just play Drannith Stinger, a couple Drannith Stingers, and cycle some cards, and your opponent ends up dying. So it's a pretty interesting deck. I've never really played it myself, but I've definitely lost to it a bunch of times. I think it is pretty underplayed considering its power level. I think it's definitely not a weak deck and does not see very much play at all. And especially in the Kage meta that we're in right now, I think this could be a actually pretty good choice to play Cycle Storm. It's pretty hard for the Kage deck to interact with. They probably only have like 6 cards in the main deck that actually do anything against you. So third place we got Dimir Control. This is pretty standard list. It is a little interesting. He is going with only 2 Considers and 4 DAs. And 2 foils, 2 Spell Pierce in terms of the counters, with 4 counter spells, of course. And he is actually playing Modern Age. It's pretty interesting. So this is a pretty interesting list. I think a lot of the time, like last week or a couple weeks ago, we were seeing a lot of the list maxing out on 4 Consider. But this time he's only going with 2 Consider and actually going with the Modern Age instead. And I think this is actually a pretty nice choice. I'm sure it's probably pretty good in the mirror, because in the mirror it can be really hard because basically all of your threats, like in like the more traditional versions where they're just playing only the 8 creatures and not playing another creature source, you're not actually having any way to like blank flyers. You're not having like a Spire Golem or, you know, anything that can just like eat fairies perma. So it's kind of nice to have like a Modern Age where like in the mirror now you're able to land this threat and it demands a removal spell. Otherwise it will just clock in. Everyone's getting really low with Snuff Outs in the mirror. So like Snuff Outs and DAs is like the name of the game. So the Modern Age probably only needs like whatever 2, 3, maybe 4 hits to actually finish someone off. So I think that it can be pretty strong in the mirror. You can bait out all the removals and then your TTs and Anglers are more likely to stick. In terms of the sideboard, it's got 4 Blasts, 2 Spell Bombs. I'm not sure what the deal is with Spell Bomb. I feel like it's not very good in the mirror. I guess it's probably pretty good against Affinity. So I guess that's probably the deal with it. 2 Thorn is actually kind of interesting. That's probably pretty good in the mirror and versus Kage as well. 1 Stormbound. This is also probably pretty good against like any sort of Chainer's Edict strategy where they're trying to Edict to get around the Ward 2 on this guy. But Stormbound Geist is really strong against Edict effects because, you know, you can just sack it and it comes back. It eats 2 Edicts. Double Chainers, it's pretty standard. You know, when Snuff Out's bad, you can bring in some Chainers. When you're playing against Bogles, you can bring in some Chainers. 2 Unexpected Fangs. This is actually kind of interesting. I think most of the lists I've seen have been on 4 Unexpected Fangs between the main and side, like somewhere in the 75. You're having the full 4 copies. So it's kind of interesting that Oscar Franco here opts for only 2 copies. It's kind of interesting. I guess with red on the downturn, it can make a lot of sense actually. And then we got, of course, the Kagates. This is, you know, one of the scariest decks in the meta. GM42, he's playing the list with Court Hussar and Force Spike. I think this is Carves' list that he popularized. With the Standard Bearers for the mirror match. Relic, 4 Hydro, 4 Pyro. With the Gorillas for the affinity. He's actually playing 5 Hydros. With the arms, okay, this is pretty standard list. Seen this all around, running around. It's pretty popular. Everyone loves to play that. And then this one is slightly different. This one's maxing out on the cantrips. 2 Spell Pierce, only the 10 creatures. 4 Strands. This one's actually the Suffocating Fumes. I think Zune was telling me today that he thinks this version's a little bit outdated with Fumes main deck. That he thinks that Fumes main deck is not really where you want to be. This one is with the Dust. So that is pretty standard list. Let's see, we got the Mardu. This deck's pretty interesting. It's got the Cleansing Wildfire. This looks like the deck that Hyson used. The Deadlies, 3 Deadlies, 1 Fumies main deck, 3 Navigator's Compass. That's kind of a lot of that effect, but I guess you don't want to lose to burn. 3 Journeys, just kind of interesting. I guess I feel like I'm not really sure why Journey is better than like Cast Down or Terminate or whatever, but I guess it's good at killing tokens with Core Skyfisher or stuff like that. I don't know. I guess it also does like get around death triggers like Stormbound Geist, stuff like that. Destroy Evil. This card is actually, I think this card does have a niche in the format, especially against like affinity decks, because it's able to destroy any of their threats pretty much, unless they're on a Frogmite version, or I guess it doesn't destroy Kenku Artificer tokens, or not tokens, but you know what I mean. And then it's also able to destroy the makeshift munitions, which can be a problem for a lot of decks. It's got the Spell Bombs, the Navigator's Compass, so it looks like he has like a decent bit of burn hate with able to go up to a lot of life gaining effects. He's got the 4 Revokes, is actually pretty interesting. He's maxing on Revokes instead of Dust, so he's sort of having the splash damage against Bogles, which I think is honestly fairly reasonable approach. And I could see this getting used more in the future, going with the max out of Revokes and skimping on Dust a bit. I think it can be totally fine. Obviously, Dust is a much more powerful card in the Affinity matchup, but Revoke does have applications in other matchups. It can destroy munitions, it can destroy journeys, so in the mirror it can probably be pretty decent. It can really mess up a Bogles player's day too, which is pretty nice. And then let's see, we got Cha-Cha, CZA with the red-white sort of standard list, standard Skyfisher, Seeker, Thraben, Kuldotha variant with 1 Rally. Yeah, this looks all pretty standard. 20 lands, 2 Electrickeries, 3 Pyros, 3 Lone Mish, 2 Dust, 2 Leave No Trace, so he's actually packing a decent bit of Bogles hate here. He's going with the different approach than the Rock 988 up here, where he's having the more focused hate cards. Leave No Trace, definitely much stronger in the Bogles matchup than Revoke Existence, and Dust is similarly much stronger in the Affinity matchup than Revoke, but they are, of course, more narrow. They only work in their own specific matchup, so he's only going to end up having, like, whatever, 2 power cards versus Bogles and 2 power cards versus Affinity, Whereas the Rock is having a much more balanced approach with 4 revokes that can be good in both matchups. And then we got Batutinha on the Bully. So this is a Gates variant, it looks like. Yeah. And he's having 4 Jardians, actually. Okay, that's fairly interesting. The Brute Force method. 2 Trickery's main deck. So it looks like he's looking to farm the Gates players. And he's actually having no Lightning Bolts. This is pretty interesting stuff. 4 Strands, 4 Lootings, 4 Screech. So he's looking to really farm these decks that go wide by using the Electrickery. He actually has like no Go Tall removal, which is pretty interesting. There's no Journeys, no Bolts, no Flame Slash, nothing like that. He's just looking, I guess, if they're playing like only 1 or 2 creatures, he's totally fine with that. He can just smack through with the Gates onto his creatures, and that should be good enough. Jardian can be pretty good against Tolarian Terror effects, especially the deck like we saw earlier that was skimping on any sort of main deck ways to deal with Jardian. That's resolved. So I think this is kind of an interesting approach and definitely a unique take on the metagame here with the Electrickery's main deck as the only removal. He is having Aura Fracture. Oh, this is interesting. Zune was talking about using this card. This is an interesting tech for Bogles. It can, you can use it to destroy a lot of enchantments at once. It does, of course, cost your lands. But if you're ahead on board, that can be totally fine. You just play this down, sack all your lands, destroy their entire enchantment setup, and they're not really able to do anything. You have maybe a couple beaters, you beat them down. 1 Revoke, couple DBCs, 1 Flaring, 2 Relic, 4 Dust. Alright, this looks pretty reasonable. And that's the top 8 for the what is this, Saturday? This is Saturday, right? Yeah, this is the top 8 for the Saturday challenge. Thanks for watching, boys. Make sure to click the subscribe button down below if you enjoyed this video. And let me know if you want me to do this every week. We can have the 420 deep analysis. And I'll probably have another video where we analyze the one from Sunday, because this did get a little bit long here.